All right, so many of you know great programs that are happening at the University of Michigan in the Business School, Positive Organizational Scholarship Program. What's the new name for that? It's
Center for Positive Organizations.
Center for Positive Organizations. And about, I guess it's in the maybe 15 years ago or something started that concept. And Wayne and Jane Dutton, who is going to be speaking here later, Bob Quinn, Kim Cameron. I was a pleasure to have been involved in the early start of that. Am I okay, Red?
No, but Derek just sat down.
Derek.
I think he's sitting down.
The big guy. Okay. So Wayne has been a prime mover in really bringing positivity in the workplace as a scholarship, an area of scholarship, an area of study, and he's also been a pioneer in the area of connectivity. And before we were really using the word networks, Wayne, when was your book on networks published? In 2000. So a real pioneer in studying social networks in the workplace. And then after that, I know you worked in Dearborn for a while, correct? And that's where you, was it the Arab community?
Yeah, we did a survey in 2003.
2003, the Arab community. And I think this led Wayne to really begin to be curious about values in America. And a lot of times you see on your little sheets, like, what are your key values? What are your core values? And it's pretty complicated to define what those are. So Wayne has studied the values that seem to unite America. He's got a positive message about the ways that maybe we're more alike than different, and the hopefulness that that might create. So it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Wayne Baker, and thank you for participating.
Well, thank you, Rob. Appreciate that kind introduction. Thank you all for being here and showing up so early on a Friday morning. It's very kind of you to do that. And thank you to Literati for willing to do the same and to bring some copies of my new book. And we're having a little technical issues here. That's why we're doing this. In fact, the reason we stretch the cord here is to prevent you from leaving until I'm done talking. That's why it's there. It's actually electrified. So just right where you are. Okay, so I do research in lots of different areas, and in the last several years I've done research on values. This is my second book that I've written and published on values, and the theme of this book is common ground. The theme is the values that we have in common, based upon empirical research, and I'll tell you very little bit about that. Empirical research really asked about 24 different values and determined that there were 10 core values, and I'll define what a core value is momentarily. This is somewhat surprising and even shocking to people that Americans do have shared values. A lot of people believe these values. These aren't the values that you think we ought to have. It's the ones we actually do have. And that's why we took this approach to it. So I also decided I would write the book for a general audience. So there's no academic jargon in there. There's one chapter for each of the 10 values. And it's as much about the misalignments that we have as well as the values that we share. So a misalignment would be where practices and policies or our behaviors are far from the values, those ideals that we have. I'm also going to talk about how this applies in a business context and a bit about a workshop that we've developed that applies this as a gateway of getting people to have a discussion about values in the workplace. So I'll talk some about values, what we mean by that, a definition. I'm going to give you a quick tour of the 10 core values, and I'll do that with some images. There's, of course, a lot more in the book that describes those. And then we're going to actually jump in. I hope we have time. We're going to do a real quick exercise. We've collected over 100 images of America. We have a discussion guide for using this. We're going to do a quick exercise here. I think will be fun and illuminating. And then I'll talk about values in the bottom line. So here's a definition of values. They're guiding principles that are timeless and unchanging. So timeless and unchanging, that we always have these, that they're enduring values. That's an important part. So here's some values in a workplace, in Zingerman's. So Zingerman's has written this out in great detail. They're guiding principles. Here's two of several. A great place to work, working in Zingerman's means taking an active part in running the business. Strong relationships, successful working relationships are an essential component of our health and success as a business, and there's much more detail under all of these. Now, one reason we know those are guiding principles or values, can you imagine Zingerman's not doing this? So let's say Ari and Paul said, you know, we made a great place to work, but that's so yesterday, we're done. Right? We're through with that. Let's move on to something new. I can never imagine them doing that because this is an enduring, timeless principle that they have at Zingerman's. Now, sometimes those espoused values, the ones that are written down, are not the values that people actually have in action, the values that actually guide their work. So in some workplaces, it might be open, free communication, but the real value is don't ever tell your boss bad news. You know, giving your boss bad news is a career-limiting behavior, right? That might be the value in action. Now, in a place like Zingerman's, the values in action and the espoused values are very close together. They're very well aligned. In other places, these two circles are completely apart. There's a list of values somewhere that have very little to do with what actually happens in the workplace. So how do the core values fit in here? We'll add another circle in our Venn diagram. So we have the 10 core values that most Americans have, most Americans believe. They overlap more or less with values in the workplace. And what I would submit to you is that we can find analogs of each of these 10 core values in the workplace. And I'll share some of that with you at the end of the talk. And I'm going to come back to those two values that I've listed up there, a great place to work and strong relationships, after I give you that quick tour and ask you which of the 10 fit in that intersection of these three rings. Okay? Are you having trouble hearing me in the back?
It's easier to use it.
Okay. All right. Is that better? Or is that too loud? Now you're captured. Okay, so Marvin, our great institute, the Institute of Social Research. So I conducted these surveys, 4 national surveys, each a nationally representative survey, through the Institute for Social Research. It was funded in part by the Institute, thank you, and by the Carnegie Endowment, Carnegie Corporation of New York. ISR is the premier outfit for doing surveys. I was delighted to have them actually do it, to assist me in that. And at the same time, I've been writing a blog called Our Values, ourvalues.org. I've been doing it every day since 2008. I've written over 2,000 columns since. This week is about the values of children's values, and a new survey by Pew that finds, in fact, we have a lot of common ground when it comes to the values that we want to teach our children. That's not in the book. You've got to go to my blog if you want to read that. Now, what happens if you take a blog with 2,000 columns, 4 national surveys, and put them in a super collider? When you do that, you end up with this, right? You end up with that book as the result of pulling those things together. And one thing I've learned in the process of doing the research and writing the blogs and speaking about it is a very wise statement that goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, which is every difference in opinion is not a difference in principle. This was from his first inaugural speech. So the idea that we can disagree.
Speaker here once.
What's that?
We had Thomas as a speaker.
I know, this goes way back. Yeah, this is an old institution. It goes way, way back. That's right. He came out here to the Northwest Territories and gave his talk. Yeah, so the idea here, of course, is that we might disagree about how we put these into practice or how we should implement them. That doesn't mean we don't have core values, shared principles. Okay, so core value, I've used that term somewhat loosely. Here's what we mean by it. And I have excruciating statistical measures of all of these. If you have insomnia, send me a note and I'll send you the paper about the technical part of it. So a very large majority of people have to agree with it. Not 51%, not 65%, but 70, 80, even 90% have to agree with it. They have to feel strongly about it. You can have agreement, but everyone's lukewarm. That's not a core value. It has to be widely shared across demographic, religious, and political lines, and it is. It has to be stable over time. That's the enduring quality to values. So I'm going to give you 2 of the questions we asked on our national survey, and think about how you might answer these for yourself. And I'm not going to ask you to actually tell us, but think about how you would answer these. So I'd rather depend on myself than on others, and I rely on myself most of the time, or self-reliance. Right? That's a core value. And you can see it here in this little bar chart. So the different colors have to do with political ideology. So the blue are liberal and the red are conservative, and then there's the middle of the road. Oh, whoops. It's all blue now. Oh, there it is back. Okay. All right, and you can see that, 3/4 of Americans, whatever the political ideology is, adhere to this value. And there's very little that are neutral or disagree with it. That's what a core value looks like. Now I'm going to show you another value that is the opposite of this, a divided or a polarized value. So I discovered 10 core values, but I asked about 24, so yes, there are other ones that we disagree on. So I call this the traditional family model. A child needs a home with both a father and a mother to grow up happy. Marriage should be defined solely as between one man and one woman. You don't have to disclose how you would answer that, but think about how you would answer those questions. And here's how Americans think about this. It's a divided value. So conservatives are much more likely to subscribe to that, to agree with it. Liberals much less likely to subscribe to that, more likely to disagree. So we see this kind of U-shape, that's kind of a polarized value. And I discovered some of those, but I decided to write the book about what we have in common, because I think that's a more important message, and it's an antidote to all the rhetoric we have about polarization. All right, so now my quick tour of the 10. So the first one is respect for others, acceptance and appreciation of people of different racial, ethnic, and religious groups. A core value fits those criteria that I just listed for you. Here's another definition of respect for others, a quality seriously lacking in today's society. That's from the Urban Dictionary. And that's because sometimes we are not aligned with that value. We have that ideal, we have that value. Sometimes we don't live up to that value. And I think it's important to put our misalignments in a cross-cultural context. So think about values and actions in other parts of the world, like Iran and Syria, ISIS, or ISIL, if you will. That's extreme disrespect. Right? We don't have that here. Our disagreements are small compared to the kind of disagreements, and that's a euphemism in a context like this, that we see elsewhere. Right, number 2, symbolic patriotism, an emotional connection to the country. So if you feel good when you see the flag flying, or when you hear the national anthem, that's symbolic patriotism. It's an emotional attachment to country. So here's the original score of the Star-Spangled Banner, and I'm sure you know if you went to the football game and you saw the halftime show when we played Miami, that was the weekend that was the 200th anniversary of the writing of the national anthem. And the halftime show was Proudly We Hail. Right? And so there's a musicologist here at the University of Michigan, Mark Twain. If you have a kid in middle school like I do, you know Clay. Clay School, that was Mark's grandfather. And this Mark is a musicologist who specializes in this music. In fact, if you go to his website, you can hear the way the music was intended to be sung back in Key's day, which is very, very different than the anthem as we know it. All right, so here's 2 other images. There's Old Glory. The original flag actually flew over Fort McHenry. I always wondered why it was kind of ragged on the end and there was a hole in it. I figured it was just old and tattered. No, those were souvenirs that the family cut out and gave away to people. They had a sort of different view of preservation back then. And then probably my favorite image is Buzz Aldrin standing on the moon with the flag. All right, here's another image for you. And Dr., can you hold this one? So this is a picture of my old sailboat. It's up anchored in the UP, and I wrote a little something about it here because you'll notice there's no flag on this boat, but there used to be. All right, so one summer I did something that some might think is unpatriotic. I removed the large American flag and flagpole from the stern of my family's sailboat. I did this for safety reasons. The pole was in the way of safe movement, and lines often fouled on it. My wife and I discussed this before making the decision to remove it. But here's why I'm telling you about it. At first, this decision seemed simple, even trivial, but my wife and I both were surprised by the mix of strong feelings it raised in us. I looked around and noticed how many boats flew the flag. What will the other sailors think of us if we removed the flag? What kind of message would we send to our young son? What we found ourselves wrestling with was symbolic patriotism. So that's what we mean by that. Third one, freedom. There are many definitions of freedom. This is having the right to participate in politics, elections, expression of unpopular ideas without fearing for one's safety. And a couple images to illustrate that. Of course, give me liberty or give me death. We have Patrick Henry making an impassioned plea to send troops. And we have the Liberty Bell. The bell was cast in England and it cracked the very first time it was rung. And the last time the bell was actually used was to celebrate George Washington's birthday. And after that, they figured the bell was just going to fall apart, so it's just like that in Philadelphia now. Now, I asked about liberty. Liberty is not a core value. Liberty means freedom from restraint. In Patrick Henry's day, it meant freedom from colonial rule. It means freedom to do whatever you want. Some Americans believe that's true. A lot of Americans believe that's not true. So liberty and freedom are two different things. In fact, the English language is one of the few that has a word for liberty and a word for freedom. And the root of the word for freedom is the same as the root of friend or friendship. It's about freedom within a community, not unrestrained liberty. Now, good advertisers know about values, and they can appeal to those values. And here's a good example of that. If you're a smoker, you can't smoke anymore, right? And so someone has deprived you of your freedom, and you need to take back that freedom. So these are the electronic cigarettes, the blue cigarettes. I'm sure you've seen people have smoked these from time to time. And so here is, you often see values used, sometimes appropriated, even unethically, in order to sell a product or promote a candidate. This is an example of an application of that in a commercial situation. All right, number 4, security. Keeping the nation safe and secure from both external and internal threats. As I'm driving here today, this morning, the only thing that's on the radio is the latest update about what's happening in Syria and Iraq. And a lot of this stems back to this terrible day back in 2001. I was teaching a class, I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm sure you all do as well. You know exactly where you were when this happened. And of course, this spawned a whole bunch of different agencies, such as the National Security Agency and about a dozen others that are involved in protecting our safety and security. All right, number 5, self-reliance. That's the one we looked at before. So this is reliance on oneself. I have to say, this is a value that I struggle with. I was brought up to be very self-reliant and never ask for help. Well, that's self-limiting to not ask for help. But it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And an illustration of that, who's this guy? So this is Ralph Waldo Emerson, the sage of Concord, who wrote a classic essay called Self-Reliance. Trust thyself as the heart vibrates to that iron string. Number 6, equal opportunity. Not equal outcomes. One question I asked was, is the gap between rich and poor too great, too wide? Do we have too much inequality? Some Americans say yes, some Americans say no. We're divided about that. But we're united about this definition of equality, which is equal access to job, education, voting, and so forth. This idea of America as the land of opportunity. One thing I talk about in the book is that there's a very wide gap between that ideal and the reality for many people. Here's a classic photo of the land of opportunity. This is probably my favorite Lewis Hines photo. This is called Ascending into America or Climbing into America. This is taken at Ellis Island of immigrants coming to America. And many of us here trace our roots back through Ellis Island. All right, number 7, getting ahead or achievement, status, and success. So I'm sure many of you watch the Sochi Olympics, and there's the gold, the silver, and the bronze. First, second, and third place. You know, who won the first gold? Do you recall? Well, the first gold was by an American snowboarder. His name was Sage. And I have a picture of him and the other 2 medal winners. So Sage is in the middle. Who's smiling? And who's not? Well, Sage is smiling because he won the gold. The Canadian to the right has a little bit of a smile because at least he made it to the platform. But the silver medalist is not smiling, and there's actually been studies of this. This is a very common phenomenon, that second place does not feel good because you could have had the gold. You got the bronze, you made it to the platform. This whole idea of getting ahead is always about social comparisons. It's always relative to someone else. I'll talk about that in a bit more. Okay, number 8. Pursuit of happiness. Enjoyment, leisure, pleasure. So I have a section in the book about, are we spoiling our children? I have another one I can read to you. And one 4th of July, I bought $100 worth of really good fireworks for me and my son. Fireworks in Michigan were really good that year due to a change in the law that allowed the sale and use of fireworks that leave the ground. Bottle rockets, sky rockets, reloadable shell devices, and the like. Advocates of the new law said it would help the local economy. Opponents were dubious and worried about the escalation of injuries. I want to ask a different question. Am I spoiling my son by spending $100 on fireworks just to make him happy? So I took an empirical approach to the issue. I asked my son if American children were spoiled. Oh, yes, he said. I asked him if he was spoiled. Yes, again. Then I asked if that was good or bad. Good, he said, because you get stuff. Bad, because you don't learn how to do things for yourself. Too late to return the fireworks. So in the chapter of the book, I talk about some of the false paths to happiness, but also some of the true paths. There's a whole science of happiness. There's a psychology of happiness. And it actually connects to some of the core values. So the idea of respect for others, if we are kind and compassionate, that elevates our happiness. Getting ahead. The more we make social comparisons, the less happy we are. So one of the prescriptions for happiness is to avoid making social comparisons. And even the value of self-reliance in extreme means social isolation, and that leads to a reduction in happiness as well. So these values are often in tension or even conflict with one another. Okay, number 9, justice and fairness. All the world's people should live in harmony. Justice and fairness for all, even people we don't know. So, an illustration of that, certainly many misalignments. We've had steps forward and steps backward. This was a step forward where President Johnson is signing the Civil Rights Act. But we've had recent examples where the Supreme Court has made other decisions which tend to bring some of that back, a step backwards rather than a step forward. So these are always values that we have out there. They're enduring principles. How we apply them and implement them is the challenge. Okay, so the last one is critical patriotism, sometimes called tough love of country. So if you criticize the government or the president or Congress, you do so out of love of country and a desire for improvement. I asked about another kind of patriotism called uncritical patriotism or blind love patriotism. That's a divided value. Some Americans believe in blind love, others don't. That's a divided value. This is one which almost everyone agrees. And here's a picture of a critical patriot. So this is Mark Twain. He started out as an imperialist, and then over the course of his lifetime became an anti-imperialist. In fact, there was an anti-imperialism league that he was a part of. Very vocal critic of imperialistic tendencies that we had at that time. Now I'll show you another one. Who's this?
Snowden.
Snowden, right? The big whistleblower. So some people say that he's a patriot. Some people say he's a traitor. That's an example of critical patriotism. All right, so here's the 10. So which one of those is in the center of those 3 rings? Remember, we have the espoused values at Zingerman's, 2 of which are a great place to work and strong relationships. Which ones do they overlap? All right, so pursuit of happiness, I would say yes. Respect for others. If you look at that, some of their guiding principles in the details, it talks about diversity and having a balanced workforce and so forth. Yeah, so there's a couple there. Respect for others is certainly one. Pursuit of happiness. What's that? Symbolic patriotism. Okay.
Equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity, right? getting ahead as well, because there's opportunities for advancement. All right, now I'll give you some more specific links between these values and workplace values in a few minutes. All right, so my contention is that there are values in the workplace, the espoused formal values. They more or less overlap with the values in action, the values that we actually have, and they're related to the 10 core values. In some places, these three rings are completely separate. Some they're very close together. Okay, so what I have to do next is that I have in this packet several images. And would like to give one to each table. And you want to go through these and just pass them among the members of your table. And pick the one that really speaks to you, that you feel a connection to. And then we'd like to have one person at a table be willing to show your image and tell the group, tell all of us, why you chose that one. And we won't have an opportunity to do all the tables, so we'll pick a few. All right, so Dante's going to help me pass this out. You're going to open it up, pass it around your table, pick one that really appeals to you and one that you would be willing to talk about. Okay? Okay, so we've done, so as a reminder, just that every one of these pictures is unique. There's over 100 pictures here. There are no duplicates at the table, so your set was a unique set. And so I asked you to look at them and pick one that spoke to you, that you felt a connection to. And we have one in the back here, so here. All right, if you would stand up and tell us.
Good morning, Janice Ordbrain with Bank of Ann Arbor. Our group started off not even seeing this image. It was stuck to the back of a different image. And so all four of us had different ideas of what something responded to us. We ended up coming together to agree on one image because it was the one thing that represented most of the core values. And we didn't really even know that until the screen came up afterwards. We thought that the idea of moving upward, we liked Normandy, storming the beach of Normandy. So we liked the idea of historical perspective, all the flags, the architecture, and then the graphic imagery, you know, moving up, the shape of the buildings, the shape of the photo.
Great, wonderful, thank you. What else? And you describe the image?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Ida, and our image is of the Statue of Liberty. We picked this, it spoke to all of us from the idea of we all come from somewhere. We talked about some of our different stories and why this related to us, but the idea of opportunity and liberty, myself, I come from a family that immigrated here, so this really spoke to me of the idea of being able to pursue anything that you wanted and some of the core values there around freedom, getting ahead, equal opportunity. And as a group, we felt that this was something that really epitomized those core values.
Great, thank you.
The Golden Gate Bridge. We went through our pictures, we eliminated the ones we didn't like. This one we can all relate to because it's very aspirational, it's travel, it's beauty, it's a desire for things that are in the future, and you know, it just makes us think of being successful and traveling.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have here.
Oh! You're going to nail me to the wall.
Stand up, please. Sorry, we have, we're the holder of the mic.
We've got a little bit different than what other folks selected. It's a small child in a cotton mill. You know, and it's a historical picture from obviously quite some time ago, but it sort of spoke to us about the unfairness and injustice that still exists even today for children.
Great, thank you.
we had a short fist fight. What I found is that it's hard to get consensus. In fact, we kind of decided it was really difficult to do. But we did choose the Frank Lloyd Wright because of the serenity of it. And what was interesting about the discussion was that a couple of us said, there are a lot of people that may never get exposed to this. So it kind of brought in a number of the values up there. But anyways, it was really interesting to have the discussion. And I won't mention Barbara's name out loud, but it was great to be able to have people speak up about what they thought.
I know Barbara, she's very shy. We too selected a picture evocative of the immigrant experience because it spoke to us as America really is the land of opportunity. And indeed, there were stories of our families, including a stowaway who came from Sweden. And if you reflect on the fact that what must have motivated people to take the type of risk that they did, it is because it was a chance for a better life, and indeed that opportunity in most cases has been realized.
Great, thank you. Great. All right, this will be our last one, please.
Okay, we narrowed it down to 3 very quickly, and then we had a bit more difficulty getting to our final one, and what we finally decided was, if our children aren't safe, nothing else matters.
So it says freedom from fear, right? And that comes from Roosevelt's 4 freedoms. One of them is freedom.
I wanted to comment on the last 2 speakers because talk about opportunities in America. Chuck and Stephanie are 2 of the senior entrepreneurs in this town. Between them have probably 75 years of entrepreneurial experience. So.
We each have that.
Well, thank you. It's always fascinating to see the images that people pick and the story behind it, why they connected to it, why that image spoke to them. Now, we've done this in the workplace as a way of getting people to talk about values. It's very difficult to do that in the abstract. This is a very powerful, safe way for people to start. Talk about these values, people discover a lot of commonalities, and then you can move to talk about values in the workplace. Okay, so I've said several times that there's an analog between the core values and workplace values, and I picked just 5 here to illustrate that point. So symbolic patriotism. So in the workplace, that might be an emotional connection to a company, product, services, branding, logos, clothing. If you look about Zingerman's, you could probably pick an image that for you, a picture of an employee or some of the zany artwork or something that really illustrates the culture for you, one of the values. Right? So freedom. So in the workplace, that might mean workplace democracy, participatory management, or open book management. So I teach about open book management, as Dante knows. He suffered through one of my classes. And Zingerman's exemplifies that. They do use open book management and are very good at it, like a living laboratory, the way it's supposed to be done. I bring that in for my students. Well, that's a practice that helps them to live some of their core values. That's why the values here are very closely aligned with practices and policies. Other places is much further apart. Security. So there would be a safe and secure workplace. So Southwest Airlines, the most profitable airlines in America, now the largest domestic carrier, never had a bad year, never lost money, has never laid anyone off. They've never had a furlough. So people don't have to worry about job security if you're working at Southwest. So they live that value and they reap the benefits as a result. You even think about psychological safety at work as an expression of that core value of security. Pursuit of happiness. So Rich Sheridan was here a couple of weeks ago talking about Joy at Work, his new book. I recommend it, I bought it, and it's a great book. I've actually quoted it in class. And he talks about joy at work. Well, that's the expression of that core value of the pursuit of happiness. And then finally, critical patriotism is constructive criticism of a company, its leaders, and its policies. So think of the places that you've worked or you work now. Can people voice opposition? Can they criticize their leaders without fear of repercussions? In some places the answer is yes. In many places the answer is no. Now think about a whistleblower. Most whistleblowers ruin their careers in most places. That's what the research shows. And yet that's an example of taking that core value. You know, that people have core values. We all have core values. We don't leave them on the doorstep when we go to work. If we're in a good place, we get to express those values, we get to live those values, and they're aligned with the values of the workplace. In other places, those core values are suppressed, and you cannot express them at the workplace. So values in the bottom line. So Kathy McDowell and I have put together a workshop about this. It's described in a flyer that we have here. You can grab one if you would like on the way out. And we use the images of America, these 100 images, to start the conversation about values. And people discover they have a lot of common ground. And with that foundation, then you can move forward to identify the actual values, not the espoused values, but the actual values in action, in play, in the workplace. They may be quite different from the values that leaders want. If they are, you may think about what are some of the misalignments. And so, you know, you may have the values, but you have to look and say, where are they misaligned? Where don't they match our policies, procedures, and so forth, and to correct those, or to create new alignments. For example, it's very hard to get people to change their values. It's much easier to hire people who have those values in the first place or are predisposed to have those values. So any great company, Zinger, which is a wonderful example, hires on values, or they may call it attitude or something similar, but the idea is hiring people who are predisposed to live the culture that you have, to enact the values that you have. So I'm going to give you an image. This is the last image I have for you because we're just about at 8:30. So I have an image. I'd like you to think about this image. What value does it represent? And how is it practiced in the workplace? There you are. So this is Menlo, right? Rich Sheridan. So on his book, it's hanging off, I think, the Y of the joy, right there. And so I visited Menlo a couple of weeks ago where they passed this around. And just like we did here today, so they wouldn't let me be a spectator. I had to jump in and do this as well. So what value does this Viking helmet illustrate?
Probably not raping and pillaging.
Not raping and pillaging? No, let's hope it's not that, right? So what does it?
Getting ahead.
What's that?
Getting ahead.
Oh, getting ahead? Okay.
Collaboration.
I'd say it's the shared knowledge that happens when they do this process.
Yeah, it's a shared knowledge, right? It's a form of workplace democracy. It's a form of freedom of expression. So it obviously doesn't have to be a Viking helmet, but what they do is they pass this around, and as you know at Menlo, they do paired programming. 2 programmers, 1 computer, and that pair each will hold a horn and will tell the group what they're doing, and will make a request if they need some help with something. Right? So it illustrates some of their principles. This principle of collaboration in the workplace, 2 programmers, 1 computer, and the sharing of information and helping one another. And they use this as you know, to help that particular process. And so what I suggest is that every workplace has these, has symbols. In fact, one thing we do is we have people go around the workplace with their phone and take photographs of what exemplifies values for them in the workplace. Maybe it's photographs of people, photographs of a logo, of a brand, whatever it might be, or to cruise the internet and go to Google Images and find images that for a worker expresses or illustrates the values in the workplace. And more times than not, we will see that there is a connection between the workplace values and those 10 core values. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk with you. And Rob, do we have time for?
Yeah, please. You
okay.
know, one of the things that we do, Wayne, sometimes you just ask them at maybe the table to come up, just take 3 minutes and talk and come up with a question for you. So that way, you know, they can interact a little bit. Yeah. So why don't you guys talk to each other for a few minutes, see if you have a question for Wayne. All right, we're ready for the questions. We'll pass these around. Well, just shout out the questions and Wayne can answer with the mic. So, who's got a question for Wayne?
So Wayne, really curious. You did a lot of values in the U.S. Have you compared this to other countries or other cultures, Europe, Asia, other places? And would you expect it to be different, or what do you expect to see?
That's a very good question. What I'd like to do is to replicate these surveys in different countries, to ask all the same questions.
That's what she said, that you would do.
I said your travel plans are made for the next 15 years, hopefully on Ross.
But there's a survey called the World Values Survey, as Marvin knows. Ronald Engelhardt, our colleague, is the chief mastermind behind it, has collaborators all around the world. And actually my first book about values includes a lot of data from the World Values Survey and puts the U.S. in cross-cultural context with 80 other countries. And what I found, if you were to look at those maps that we drew, I have in my earlier book, you see that the U.S. is an outlier. It's out there all by itself with its values. It's really, really amazing that how different we are. So I think what I would discover is that if I replicated this particular survey, I would find reinforcement of that idea that America is qualitatively different than all other societies. Yeah, if you're interested in that, Google World Values Survey. If you do that, you'll come up with the maps. And you'll search around and you'll find the U.S. in a little corner all by itself. Yes, in the back, please.
Yeah, Wayne, you talked a little bit about the difference between espoused and values and use. And I'd like if you could say a little more about that, because it seems like a lot of these values, yes, we would say we believe in those, but that's not the way we behave as a country. And so can you say more about that?
Yeah, so values are guiding principles. They're also ideals. I'm sure if you ask Ari or Paul, they would say that as Zingermans, they often don't live up to them, but they try to live up to them, and they do come close to that. I think there will always be a little bit of a misalignment between one's behaviors and the values that we have, but at least we have those values. And I would submit that the misalignments are relatively small once you look at what's happening around the rest of the world. You know, it's easy to magnify our differences, and some ways to remedy that, or at least to counter that, is to say that, you know, we have to compare ourselves to what's going on elsewhere in the world. We have the values that many societies don't have, and at least we're trying to live up with them, although we fall short many times. We're trying to live up to those. Another is that it's important not to confuse weather and climate. It's very easy to say, you know, we can look at what's happening in Washington. You know, that's today's weather. What does that tell us about long-term climate change? And so it's very easy to read too much into contemporary events. And in fact, you know, a lot of these things that we've seen historically are cyclical. They go up and down. Now, I admit we're kind of in a low point, but it has been up. There have been ups and downs throughout our history. Yes.
Hi. So, give you a little bit of background before I ask my question. In my previous life, I was a brand manager, and then started my own consulting company to start to connect consumer insights to innovation and to brand strategy. So I do a lot of consumer insight work, and a lot of my research focuses on 16 core motivations by Stephen Rees. I don't know if you're familiar with his research from Ohio State, from our enemy, but what I was wondering is, how do your 10 core values map to motivations, and have you ever looked at that before?
No, that's a good question. The question is, how do these 10 core values map to motivations?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, these can be thought of as motivational principles in the sense that they motivate us to behave in certain ways and to make certain kinds of decisions. Even if we fall short from it, they motivate us to do that. And I think the deeper answer is that that's an empirical question, so I've not looked at that empirically, but as a scientist, that's what I would do, is that if I were to do that, I would say, I would figure out how to map people's motivations and see how much they correlate with these values. And I think I would find that there are some correlations between the two, because these are motivational principles.
Let's assume you're called in to do a little work within an organization, and there's divisiveness. How do you start that conversation? I mean, what is the baseline? That's probably a bigger question than this. We can talk off camera.
That's right. I often get questions like that from my MBA students. You know, it's like, it's a really good question that will take 10 hours to really answer. But it's an excellent question, so I don't know if you could all hear it or not, which was that, what happens if you go into the workplace and you find that they're very divided? What do you do? Well, one thing I found talking about this research on our common ground is that if you start with our differences, you can't get very far. You know, it kind of just devolves into a lot of finger pointing. But if you start with what we have in common, if you start with our common ground, you can make a lot more progress. And one way in a divisive situation like that is that I would never start talking about workplace values or even a divisiveness. When we eventually get to that, I would do the exercise that we did in a more extended way, and people would start to discover that they have a lot of commonalities, that they do have this common ground, and I think with that foundation, they could go further. But as you say, and as you know from experience, that's a deep problem, and there isn't a single remedy to it. But that's how I would start that.
Can we do the Vulcan mind meld so you can have me do that?
Yeah, the Vulcan, yeah.
Wayne, we're going to wrap up, and I want to thank one of our most valuable resources in the community here, Wayne Baker, for the great work that you're doing. And I can't say he's an exemplary person at the university, as is Marvin and a few other people, because they are very focused on the community and building community as well as doing their research. So all of Wayne's research has benefited Ann Arbor and the work world, so we appreciate that. And you're willing to take on a few things that are not the most sexy things to take on, but you make them very interesting, so we appreciate it. So Hillary is going to be selling the books from Literati, and Wayne, if you can have a seat up here, and this is your throne here, and if we could create a line back here for people that want to buy the books. If there's people that have to get out of here in a hurry, be a little aggressive and say, "Hey, can you mind?" Because I think that some people are not as eager to get out. And then we also encourage people to stick around to do some networking. I don't think there's any events coming in here, so often people will hang around and get to know each other. You might search around the room and say, "Hey, I want to talk to that guy about the conference," or "I want to talk to that woman because she just looks interesting," or whatever it might be. And then next month, I want to tell you what's coming up, because we've got a really interesting group of people coming, and Hillary will be selling books for Jim Tobin October 17th. And how many of you watched the Roosevelt special on TV? Okay, fascinating special. I even turned off the Tigers between innings to watch it, a few times. So, and I turned off the Michigan game completely, but that's a whole other story. And, but Jim Tobin has written a book about Roosevelt and how his polio, which could be perceived as a tragedy in his life, turned him into the great leader that he became. So it's called The Man He Became, and he'll be presenting on this book. He was just on Terry Gross, repeat on Terry Gross, so that's just the highest honor for an author. And Jim is a personal friend of mine. I've known him since he's a teenager, actually, believe it or not, and he will be presenting. And then in November, we have Larry Freed, who developed and sold a company called 4C, which is one of the most successful startups in Ann Arbor, and now is doing a consulting gig, and he will be talking about managing big data. So what's this whole stuff about big data? How do we understand it? What does it mean for us? And then in December, Len Middleton, who's one of the favorite speakers for this group, will be back, and Len has a big announcement about a new project that he will be doing at the university. So it's pretty special. And one more that we have booked, we have several next year in January, and Derek hopefully will sponsor this. We have one of the premier people in advertising in the world, Liz Ross, who's just been made Chief Marketing Officer of, is it Media Brands? That's the big, it's one of the big 3 or 4 advertising companies in the world, and she's locally grown. And then Molly McCutcheon, who's going to be a local company in advertising. So those people will be here. And then we're going to go through, we have other speakers all through the year next year, which I will be sending out. Wayne's talk and video will be up on my internet. We'll send out it through Dr. Rob, probably on Tuesday morning. So if you want to share this with people at your work, I think it could be really good for a great discussion, because I think one of the things I think people struggle with is, are we really living our values? It's not so much what they are, but are they real, or are they espoused to kind of make us look good? So Wayne, are you ready for some serious signing? You ready? Okay, good. He's got his latest book, and he'll have his latest recording out on Tuesday. So please sign up. Any questions? Pat, you had something?
I just want to thank thank you for hosting these breakfast meetings. They're wonderful. Thanks to Wayne Baker.
Thank you.
And also thank our videographer, Roger, who's also celebrating his birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday, Roger. The Good News Board, some of you have been following my life through Facebook or whatever, but we had a grandchild this year, a wedding, and then my two sons are going to be officially having their ceremonies. Ann is going to be married in March, and we've just heard that he and Katrina Lewis will be married, and my son Adam will be married to Sarah, who was also in USAID, as you were, and that will be in June. So this is a big year for the Pasick family. We're all very excited. Feel free to bring back some food, so we don't like to leave it, and you know, if you have a workplace or you're just hungry, grab some extra food.
I didn't talk to you right now.